Okay, so how many of you have had a baking day yet this Christmas season? Anybody have their day of baking? Where I saw yesterday, I noticed on Facebook, I saw all sorts of people that yesterday or last weekend was their day of baking, and they got together and they made just Christmas cookies and all sorts of stuff. And some of you have done that, right? Well, yesterday was mine, which means I make one thing, and I don't bake it. So I can't really call it a day of baking. But yesterday I got with one of my boys, and we made my favorite Christmas thing, and they are chocolate-covered peanut butter balls. Best thing ever. My mom always made them at Christmas time. Every year at this time, I get angry that I thought all year long that I had to wait till Christmas to make them, because they're great and I need to make them more often. So Jack and I got together and we started making it, and I had gone to the store earlier in the week and bought all the stuff that I needed and made sure that I was ready. There was one thing that I kind of forgot to look for, and I assumed that we just had. And one of the kind of weird, at least for me, non-bakers, weird thing that I put in it is paraffin wax goes in with the chocolate, and so it makes it harden the chocolate as you do it. Most of you already know this. It's news to me. But so we got everything else. We didn't get the wax, and so I'm searching for through the kitchen yesterday, looking for the wax, and luckily I found one piece of the wax in order to make the chocolate-covered peanut butter balls. And you know, it's funny, the chocolate and the peanut butter are kind of the stars of the show, but without the wax, it isn't going to work quite right. And it was really important that I found all the ingredients. And when you don't know anything about what you're doing, like me, you make sure you have everything you're supposed to have. If you know what you're doing, you might just substitute something or figure it out. Not this guy. I just follow the recipe. So we got them done, and it worked out. But the reality is I'm not a baker and I'm not a cook. I'm not good at any of that stuff. I can make eggs pretty good. But other than that, I'm not great. I do a mean bowl of cereal. And a lot of times I really don't understand why certain ingredients go in food. You know, and you read the ingredients and you're like, are you serious? Why does this? Like, I don't know the difference between baking soda and baking powder. And I really don't know what either one of them does, except I know that if you put baking soda in the fridge, it'll help soak up some of the smells. But other than that, I'm clueless. And I remember one time trying to make chocolate chip cookies or something, and I think it called for like a half a teaspoon of baking soda, and I used baking powder, and it all went down from there. It's not good. So I don't know what it does, but don't switch them. They're not the same just because they both say baking. I learned that one. Or like my wife loves cilantro. And so we'll be eating some kind of Mexican especially dish, and she'll say, man, this would be so much better with cilantro. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what that does when you put that in the thing. Or the worst one are onions. I've heard it my whole life. We're gonna put onions in for flavor. Do you say this to the people that you love? I'm going to put onions in for flavor. And my response has always been, I don't like the flavor of onions. Why are you putting them in for flavor? I'll never understand. I just am not. We'll go out to eat when it's my turn. But ingredients matter. And especially using the right ingredients matter. Watch this.
Days like today, I often ask myself, Christy, why in the name of one-horse open sleighs are you so busy making Christmas bread when you run your own cupcake business? Well, every year I like to mix things up a little bit and make an exception for these beauties. So, why Christmas bread? Well, I have been told that my Christmas bread is the confectionery manifestation of heaven. Does that sound bragging? I don't mean for it to. It's just what I've been told. Baking contest blue ribbons don't lie. Now, there is one thing that I will never, mark my words, never make in my cupcake shop, for it is a horrible, treacherous Christmas abomination. Fruitcake. I mean, first of all, just no. Second of all, no. I mean, does it even need to be said? You either want fruit or cake. I personally do not want both at the same time. I mean, you might as well make a drink called orange toothpaste juice. Anywho, growing up, I learned the art of baking from my mama. She would make loaves of this very bread and then wrap them up in beautiful boxes that stacked as high as our Christmas tree. And then I'd get to help her deliver them all over our neighborhood. People loved to see her coming. Especially our neighbor, Miss June, sweetest little old lady, liked to talk to mailboxes. Now, when baking for others, my mama taught me that you pray for each person or family as you bake. I know, bread is probably not going to change somebody's life forever, but who knows, right? After all, big things can come from really little places. Like my Aunt Gert, big-haired, tiny woman, drove a semi-truck till she was 82 years old. If you looked in your rearview mirror, you'd just see 2 knuckles and a bouffant. Anywho, like Bethlehem, for instance. Nobody thought a thing about that little old place until Jesus came and just blew the doors right off. Oh, and listen to this. Now, I may be denser than Papa's peanut brittle, but I learned in church that there are actually 2 Bethlehems in Israel. Now, the one where Jesus was born, the one in the south, is called Bethlehem Ephrathah. Bethlehem means house of bread, and the word Ephrathah means fruitful. So, altogether, the place where Jesus was born is the fruitful house of bread. Now, this is not a biblical reference to fruitcake. This is fruit bread. There is a difference. Fruitcake is better suited to anchor a boat than to usher in the birth of a king. Isn't that great? Little old Bethlehem, chosen to be the place where God's Son, the biggest gift in a tiny body, would draw his very first human breath. What a perfect recipe for mankind. The bread of life. So let's not get all caught up in the holly jolliness of gift giving without really receiving the main gift. Or the main ingredient. Can you imagine forgetting the main ingredient? I shudder to think of it. Well, like this sugar here. Well, if I were to forget the sugar, then we would have a Christmas calamity on our hands. Well, without the sugar, well, I'll be a snowflake in July. It seems that I have substituted the salt for the sugar all this time. Oh, holy handbells. I have made something worse than fruitcake.
There's one thing she said that I really liked. Big things can come from really little places. She told you a little bit about Bethlehem. Jesus, this ultimate gift of Christmas, 2,000 years ago, comes to this little place called Bethlehem. And so every year when we read the story, we read about it, in Luke, and we read about it in Matthew, and especially in Matthew, we read about how after, the nativity happens, after Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and the shepherds come, then we hear about this group of people that come from the east, the wise men, the magi, and they come, and in Matthew 2, it talks about this. And it says that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem and Judea in the time of King Herod, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, "Where is the one who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was alarmed, and all Jerusalem with him. After assembling all the chief priests and experts in the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they said, "for it is written this way by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are in no way least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" So the prophecy that the wise men are being referenced to when they come to Herod, and they're like, they know that he's coming somewhere, they come to Herod and they ask him, and he didn't know, so he asked his people, and they said, well, yeah, it says Bethlehem. Prophecy comes out of from the prophet Micah about 700 years before this. And of all the Old Testament prophecies that are referenced during the season, like Isaiah, about Jesus coming, one of the most quoted is from Micah. And this is what Micah 5:2 actually says. As for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, seemingly insignificant among the clans of Judah, from you a king will emerge who will rule over Israel on my behalf, one whose origins are in the distant past. Something big was coming to this seemingly insignificant little town. Jesus, the Messiah, would be born there. And as our Christy in our video referenced, this town means house of bread. But even before the prophecy in Micah, even before certainly Jesus, something else big happened centuries ago in the same city, Bethlehem, where bread was at the beginning, at the center of the story. So I told the kids, if you think about it, there are tons of bread references in the Bible. Over 5,000 references to bread or baking of bread. We talked about a couple of them. The manna that they found in the desert, the Gideon being found in a wine press, hiding, threshing wheat, trying to make bread for his family. And then, of course, with Jesus feeding the 5,000 with mostly bread, talking about bread as his body, as he is broken for his disciples, for his followers, calling himself the bread of the world. And deep in the Old Testament, we see this story about, again, bread at the center of relationship. This is a story about Ruth and Naomi. Now, if you want to hear the whole story, you can go back on our website to October 14th, a couple months ago. We actually told this story and read it and learned a little more about Ruth and Naomi, but we're just going to summarize it a little bit today. If you remember the story, Naomi has two sons, and they're married to two women, and Naomi's husband and then sons all die, and she's left with these two daughters-in-law. And she says to them, they're both foreigners, she says, I'm going to go back to my own land, which is Judah, and you go back to your homeland. And one of them does, and the other one, named Ruth, says, no way. I'm going to go where you go. I'm going to be with you no matter what happens. So they take off, and they head back to where Naomi is from, eventually find their way to Bethlehem. 1,000 years before Jesus was born, Ruth and Naomi get back to Bethlehem, where Naomi is from. So in those days, if you owned a field, the rule was, the command out of Leviticus is that you don't harvest the corners of your field. So you'd leave the corners so that those that were poor would have access to something. So they were allowed to come and kind of take from those corners in order to feed themselves and their families. So it might be just poor people in your own country, it might be foreigners that are making their way through, but for whatever reason, somebody was going to find those corners for the sake of feeding themselves. So Ruth is a foreigner. She has no husband. She has no father. She has nobody to take care of her and her mother-in-law, and so she goes out into the fields, and that's what she's doing. She's following the workers, gathering up what they've dropped and gathering the edges, gleaning the corners of the field, as they say, so that she can go home and make bread. She runs into this guy, the owner of the field. His name is Boaz. He saw her, and he was kind to her. He gave her more food to take home, and so she went home with bread and offered to her mother-in-law and said, this is what happened when I met Boaz. So Naomi gave Ruth tips on how to connect, how to win this man, Boaz. So the deal is this. He's a distant relative. And he fits the role of what they call a kinsman redeemer. which means that since her husband had died, he could come in and marry her and take care of her and her family. It's part of the law that guided God's people. And so throughout this process, Naomi encourages Ruth. Ruth does the right things to make her availability known to Boaz, and Boaz eventually marries her. So in the end of her story, her trip to Bethlehem not only included gifts of bread from Boaz, but also a breadwinner, a kinsman redeemer in Boaz himself, who would provide for her and her family for the rest of their lives. In chapter 4, it concludes the story of Boaz and Ruth by telling us that their marriage, and later they were blessed with becoming parents to a son named Obed. And not only was that a big deal for Ruth, it was a big deal for Naomi. She was blessed with a grandson that she longed to hold for so long. The village women, it says in Ruth 4, the village women said to Naomi, "May the Lord be praised, because he has not left you without a guardian today. May he become famous in Israel. He will encourage you and provide for you when you are old, for your daughter-in-law who loves you has given him birth. She is better to you than 7 sons." Naomi took the child and placed him on her lap. She became his caregiver. The neighbor women named him, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. Now he became the father of Jesse, David's father. So we have this story of Ruth and Naomi. They come back to Bethlehem, and there in Bethlehem they meet Boaz, and Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer for their family. He takes her as his wife, and in that marriage it produces a son, Obed. Obed then produces a son, Jesse. Jesse then has a son named David. David, you may recognize. He killed a giant once and became the king. And out of his line and out of his family, the prophet said would come the Messiah. Through the ages, the little town of Bethlehem became known as the city of David. It's how the angel of God described the location to the shepherds when they were watching their flocks, when they came upon them. And they said in Luke 2, "Today your Savior is born in the city of David. He is Christ the Lord." The angel was telling the shepherds the good news that a kinsman redeemer of all people had just entered the world and arrived on the scene. Jesus came to rescue humanity in the same city where his ancestor Boaz had redeemed his grandmother Ruth. The genealogy of Jesus is recorded in Matthew in chapter 1, verses 5 to 6, and it echoes this. It says, "Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah." So just before the story of Jesus' birth, you have this genealogy. The writer thought it was appropriate to remember the lineage of the Messiah, the Christ who came to rescue and redeem. It's only fitting that 2 of his ancestors met during the barley harvest, needing to make bread, as they led ultimately to the bread of life that is Jesus. The smallest things can change the world. Think about it. In the Bible, we see this over and over again. We see it with Moses. One small baby in a basket discovered by Pharaoh's daughter ended up leading to the rescue of God's children. One man giving lunch leftovers to a girl who was poor began a marriage that would lead to King David and ultimately to Jesus. A small town, insignificant to most, became the place where God's Son would arrive as one of us. And even here, a small church in a bedroom community in the middle of America can be used too to do great things. an individual willing to listen to God's Spirit and guidance in their everyday lives can change everything. The story of Christmas, the gift of Jesus, is the gift of bread. Bread, the thing that sustains us. Bread, the thing that Jesus says, whenever you eat it, remember me. Jesus comes as the bread of life. And sometimes huge things come from very small places. We all love the chocolate chips in our chocolate chip cookies. But if you get the half a teaspoon of baking soda wrong, no amount of chocolate chips can fix it. The little things have an impact. So ask yourself this season, what are the moments that you're creating? Maybe this Christmas we could be a people who give faithfully. The little things, the little gifts of love and appreciation that allow the bigness of our God to couple his timing to produce more than we ever dreamed. The gift of Christmas is the gift of Jesus. The bread of life given in the house of bread to a people who are starving. That's a gift to celebrate. Let's pray.